Before I start reading, speaking of Rogue Faculty Press, I'd like to introduce the two people who make up Rogue Faculty Press. A friend of mine, Jeff Lacey. Jeff and I have been friends for 20 years, and his good friend, and now mine, Calvin Banks. Rogue Faculty Press out of Ralston is, I think they really have a great opportunity to be one of the premier poetry publishers in the state, if not the premier poetry publisher. So we're welcome, guys. Thanks for coming up from the metropolis. Did you come on the motorcycle together? No.
You came in a smart car.
In a smart car, okay. Very good. Calvin owns an Indian motorcycle, and if you'd like to hear a very interesting lecture, ask him if an Indian is better or worse than a Harley Davidson. And he will give you a very spirited lecture on that. Very good. Welcome, guys. Thank you. I know that there are some people in the room who are not students, but I did know from past experience that quite a few people here would be students. So I kind of tailored my talk tonight to the students in the room. Because I was one of you once, a student, a regular college student who just happened to be interested in a lot of things, but especially writing. It's been a constant for me. I grew up on a farm northwest of Elgin. My parents' farm is in the little triangle between Elgin, Neely, and Clearwater. And I've been interested in writing and know that writing was going to play some part in my life since I was about 15 years old. But I found that as I started writing, the longer I wrote, the less I wrote. The longer I wrote, the less I wrote. And what I mean by that is that the longer I stayed with writing in terms of time, my pieces of writing became smaller and smaller and more concentrated. In hindsight, it was very obvious what direction I was going, but of course I never would have admitted that at the time, because poetry, that's for other people, right? I considered about every other genre in writing except poetry, until it was actually Jeff Lacey in the spring of 1995. It was about the time to register for classes, and Jeff told me, Dwayne, you have to take Dr. Welch's poetry writing class. And I said, okay, because I had heard very, very good things about Dr. Welch's poetry writing class. But you know, poetry, I still kind of looked askance at it. It's not, I don't know if that's my thing or not. Well, I took the class, and it only took about a half a class period for me to realize that Dr. Welch and I were going to get along real well. And that ended up being true. And it wasn't many class sessions into the semester when Dr. Welch brought in this particular poem that I want to read to you first. I always like to start off a reading by reading stuff by other people. This is something he brought in very early in the semester, and I never heard of the guy who wrote the poem before. He ended up becoming reasonably famous later, and his name is Ted Kuzer. Had no clue who he was at the time. And Dr. Welch brought in this poem, and I'm going to be real honest, this poem coasted right over my head and right out and rose over the interstate. I had no idea what was happening in this poem. But there was one word in this poem that caught my ear. And so I'm going to read this poem to you and listen if you can hear the word. It's called In the Corners of Fields. Something is calling to me from the corners of fields, where the leftover fence wire suns its loose coils, and stones thrown out of the furrow sleep in warm litters, where the gray faces of old no-hunting signs mutter into the wind, and dry horse tanks spout fountains of sunflowers, where a moth flutters in from the pasture, harried by sparrows, and alights on a post, so sure of its life that it peacefully opens its wings. Did you hear the word? I tried not to emphasize it. It was the word pasture. And when I heard that one word in this poem that otherwise went right over my head, something clicked. If Kuzer had chosen a more highfalutin word like prairie at that point, he might have lost me. But pasture, of course, that spoke to my background, and at that moment, poetry in my life started to intermingle, and the rest is becoming my life story. So this Welch guy was my teacher, and of course I was interested in him as a person because he was really interesting to listen to. And I had a job as a writing tutor in the UNK library, and there was a lot of downtime during the semester. At the end, you got real busy, but in the middle of the semester, it was pretty quiet. So I went looking for Welch's books in the library, and I found all kinds of them. And I found in one of his books, it was actually a different version, a different book where this poem appeared. I paged through it, and this title caught me. This title caught me, and the title is "Old German Woman." Now, I'm from Elgin, and there are parts of the Rhineland that are not as German as Elgin, Nebraska. Okay, and so I thought, I know dozens and dozens of German women, old German women. Let's see if this guy knows what he's talking about. So I read this poem, and I'll read it to you now. Old German woman. What she was, she was. When she appeared to be. Not having to suffer herself into being, she simply yearned, having the ground sense necessary. But when she moved, she created a field. And when she loved, it was like water beating up inside its own bead. For a long time, flying abroad, she was a small hedge bird rising and falling, until hanging on like the slenderest nerve in the exhausted fields, under the low bush of evening, she became a slight tone. And when she paused, it mattered deeply. Like I said, I know dozens and dozens of old German women, but the one that came to mind was my own father's mother, my paternal grandmother. And again, like, I was a very inexperienced reader of poetry at the time. Most of this poem just coasted right over my head, but the last stanza spoke to me. And when she paused, it mattered deeply. Because when Grandma paused, it mattered deeply. Because I was usually in very richly deserved trouble at that point for doing something, like hiding things in her cellar that shouldn't have been there. Sorry, long family story. Mom's here. So, I started writing poetry. To you writing students in the room, you're very busy with your other classes. You've got busy lives, social lives, and such. I would encourage you, when you are young, if you are just coming to writing and you're kind of feeling out how writing will fit into your life, I would really encourage you simply to read everything you get your hands on. Put that phone down. It'll be fine without you. You'll be fine without it, and just read. That poem, Old German Woman, I read, and I forgot about it for a long time, until about 7 or 8 years later. I had been married, we had a baby on the way, and I found myself writing about not an old German woman, but an old Irish widow. Now you go west of Elgin, the Germanic influence stops, and then you get into 1, ranch territory, and 2, Irish territory. 2 very good reasons why you are in deep trouble if you go west of Elgin, Nebraska. This is about an old Irish widow. This is from my first book, Garden of Stars. Forecasted like a summer storm, Great Aunt Velda drove out for visits in her grand marquee, the size and shape of a thunderhead. Her denim skirts reminded me of rain on the horizon, and how she laughed and what she laughed at reminded me of hail. Like wind, she never said hello or goodbye. She simply arrived and was herself, picking at the coffee cake my mother baked for her. Sometimes when she'd gone, we'd had an inch or more of good hard rain. Other times, all the crops were beaten to sticks and my mother was crying. I like to read this poem in public, especially for the younger people in the room. I want to read this one tonight because it really shows how I work as a writer. There's really no secret. If you read my poems, I really do the same thing over and over again. What I come up with is basically one metaphor, and then I write on both sides of it until, as I like to say, they blur sharply together. They blur sharply together. This poem was just a ton of fun to write, and I hope it's a ton of fun to listen to. This is about a coffee shop in Wayne, Nebraska. And if you look over these folks' shoulder, you see that flat screen television over there? If you're younger than about 25, I'd like to tell you that TVs did not always look like that. TVs used to be these gigantic things that were as deep as they were wide, or deeper sometimes. And for the non-students in the room, if that TV wasn't coming in, what could you do? You had some options. You could adjust the antenna, right? Tin foil on. Yes, hadn't thought of that. It's worth writing about. You could adjust the vertical hold, which is what kept the TV, the picture on the screen from spinning. And then the most satisfying one of them all, you could just walk over and whap it on the side, right? And that was really, really good behavioral conditioning, because once it worked for you, it worked forever. And it was the first thing you'd try forever. You hit on something like that, and it's going to fall off the wall, and you're probably going to get your teeth knocked out, right, by the owner. But I was walking by the coffee shop in Wayne, America one morning, and it struck me that coffee shop resembled, in its bay window, it resembled an old television. And that's how it usually starts for me in a piece of writing. I get that one metaphor, and then I just start writing. And this poem, I put through 70 drafts at least, over 3 days. I was just having so much fun writing this one. Coffee shop. Already at 5 a.m., the coffee shop is lit up like an old television. Its bay window to Main Street, a staticky screen, a big silver donut rack bringing in the signal. But this time of day is too early for drama, so our small town station is broadcasting reruns, black and white or technicolor comedies and westerns. Bang gently a few times on one side of the morning, and what do you know? There's Burt Lancaster, rehearsing weather and markets with Jackie Gleason and Ward Cleaver, Andy Griffiths and the Lone Ranger. You can catch each of these men starring all day long in a series of his own somewhere in town, on a farm or a highway, in a factory, lumber yard, or classroom. Yet for now they're together on the same channel, humming a single theme song with the old cast of familiars, while strong coffee adjusts the vertical hold on their working lives. Through the mono speaker of the shop screen door, ring out the silver six-shooters of their laughter. A few years after this poem was written, I love to follow up that poem because it ends with on a happy note. They have this tradition at that coffee shop that if it's your birthday, you buy coffee for everyone. Well, there was a local gentleman who, it was his birthday, and he had recently sold some land, so everyone knew he was in the money, and he refused to buy coffee. And before long, fists were thrown, and they had to call the cops. There was a fist fight at the coffee shop. So it's a good thing those silver six-shooters are only metaphorical, right? All right. The way Magellan must have felt, my book that I'll be reading from tonight that was published so well by Rogue Faculty Press. I'm so impressed with how the book turned out. I had nothing to do with that. That's all these gentlemen right here. So keep your eye on Rogue Faculty Press, folks. They're really, really going to make a name for themselves. The way Magellan must have felt was already underway before my first book was published. And if you've ever been to Wayne, Nebraska, I see a few people in back who are from Wayne. Go Blue Devils. If you've ever been to Wayne, go to Bressler Park. Bressler Park's one of the nicest places in Wayne. And on the north end of Bressler Park, there's something that looks like a large headstone, but it is a monument. And it's not it doesn't stick out as a monument like a statue would or something like that, but it's a very important monument, I think. It's a monument to Nebraska's poet laureate in perpetuity. Who's that? John Neihart, the poet laureate in perpetuity. Most people know him for having written Black Elk Speaks, but he also wrote, of course, Cycle of the West. I mean, there are only a handful of readable attempts at an epic poem since John Milton, and one of them was written by a Northeast Nebraskan, folks. That's worth being proud of. But on that monument is a stanza of one of Neihart's lesser-known poems, and that's the quote that I put at the beginning of the book. "The near grows out of the far." There's a line from that stanza. "The near grows out of the far." Writing's taught me a lot of things about myself and about the world, but one thing it has taught me that I don't think any other avenue in life would have taught me is that for some reason, the way the human mind works, or at least my human mind works, for some reason we have the hardest time seeing the things that are right in front of us. I don't know if that's one of the consequences of the fall or what have you, but we have the hardest time seeing what is right here, what is local. And sometimes we need to go way out to see what is right in front of us. So we need to take a much more circuitous path. The near grows out of the far. So over and over again, in the way Magellan must have felt, I use far things to explain near things. I use far away things to explain what's right in front of me. Any writing student will tell you what you need at the beginning of a good piece of writing, no matter what it is a good attention getter. And you need to grab the audience's attention somehow. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Anybody who's taught English or taken an English class has probably had this conversation. There are a lot of ways to do that. My first poem in the book is one that I definitely intend to be an attention getter. The kind of attention getter that makes you think, does that even happen? And the title is very simply Seagulls in Nebraska. Has anybody in the room ever seen seagulls in Nebraska? They do migrate through. It's a very short window of time in the spring, especially if it's been wet, but there are seagulls in Nebraska. So here's a poem called Seagulls in Nebraska. They flock over this unplanted field as if it were a gulf or great lake. What matter hills and tides? What matters latitude, high up in open space? Surfaces forever undulate. Heights are always heights. And all flight is everywhere the same. So can you write poems in Nebraska? You absolutely can. Don't let anybody tell you any different. Speaking of Bressler Park, I'd like to read a poem for you that's set in Bressler Park. A lot of my poems come from just ordinary things that I do as a teacher or father or local guy. This one is set in Bressler Park. This is not an actual experience. I kind of combined about 36 experiences together into one. This is called Town Park in Spring. It's about taking my kids to the park. The songs of robins sound like rusty swings, back and forth all afternoon, here in April, at the town park, where I brought my kids to play while I read the new Sports Illustrated. Other birds play too. Blue jays at tag, cardinals at tetherball, a flock of sparrows squeaking on an oral merry-go-round. For birds are like children, playing whatever and whenever they wish, that kind of play guided only by whim and pure excitement. And children are like birds, all chirp and chitter and flutter and float, until that avian play scatters from them like startled blackbirds, and the fun they knew is suddenly reduced to reading Sports Illustrated. Nothing we can do will stop it, save read and play and read, back and forth all afternoon, the robin song swinging all around us, April's first warm day. That one was also a ton of fun to write. Local monuments. If you're from Wayne, a lot of these poems are set in Wayne. Not all of them. Where I live in Wayne is on the west end of town. There's the two water towers. Sorry, and I live near the west one. And between my house and Wayne High School is the town cemetery. And I don't know. If you are stuck, if you're a writing student and you're stuck for something to write about and you have an assignment, find your local cemetery and just go out there. I think for me it's almost impossible to walk into a cemetery without seeing something worth writing about. One morning I was walking to school through that cemetery, and it was right after the birds had started to sing in the spring, and it was loud. Like if it was rock music, we would have been asking to turn the music down. So it just struck me all of a sudden that the headstones were a lot like robins. Headstones. The headstones here resemble robins, slow birds of stone, wings folded in. They perch at the tips of the limbs of time, their spring too large for anyone to sense, their songs too high for living pitch. My students sometimes ask me, gosh, it seems like we talk about death a lot in this class. And my response is, I walk through a cemetery every day to teach the British poets. Okay, that should have answered your question. Okay, as an intellectual topic anyway, it's something I'm pretty comfortable with. I write a lot about birds, and not just the most common ones, robins and cardinals, and I apologize to the blue devils in the back of the room for, in that previous poem, mentioning cardinals and blue jays. Sorry about that. I write about some of the more uncommon birds too. One of my favorites in the book is one called red-headed finch, and there is actually such a bird, and this one took a little bit of research. I was pleased with myself that I had isolated it as a finch, and of course I was riding out back one summer morning, and the bird landed like closer from me to that chair away, and the red-headed finch landed there and just looked at me. What's up? It looked at me, and it's an incredible bird because if you only saw it from the neck up, you'd swear up and down it was some kind of cardinal. If you looked at it from the neck, from the neck up, it would look like a cardinal. From the neck down, it would look like, I don't know, some other kind of bird. It was very gray down below. And you'd be hard-pressed to notice about that bird where the red stopped and the gray began. And that was the connection for me. Red-headed finch. The cardinal color of its head fades to subtext somewhere below the neck. The nuance, the subtlety of the finch, a sense of irony that cardinals, in their straightforwardness, miss. I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased as a poet to have any reader at all. But I would be very, very pleased if you folks who are reading my book here in Northeast, if you are able to finish my book and have no idea where I stand politically. I like to think that if I am doing my job as a poet, I am apolitical. Some people would disagree with me on that, but I hope no one knows where I stand politically from any of these poems. But I had taken my kids a couple summers ago to the trout rearing station over by Ashfall Fossil Beds. Has anybody ever been there? You should go there. It's really a neat place. I'm a Nebraskan, so all the fish I know are bass and bluegill and catfish, and that's about it. This is the first time I'd ever been close to any kind of trout. And this is a poem about a rainbow trout. If I conform, it will be to my own spine, the river of my sinews. If I give in, it will be to natural direction, not current force. If I obey, it will be towards something far upstream, the ancient faith. So that's my defiantly apolitical poem right there. Speaking of metaphor, this is a poem that I've never read in public before. It's about our old garage. One summer, we were hoping to move to the house where we live in now. We were at an old house, and I had this old broken down garage, and I really wanted to have it taken down and have someone put up a new garage, but we just didn't have the money, and it wasn't practical if you're going to move. So I had to paint this garage to make it look better than it actually was. And so I was out in the alley for about 2 weeks painting that garage, and there were some stray cats out there, and that's the connection, the garage and the cats. Old garage. It's hung around out back for years, out near the alley, like a stray cat, half feral. Its peeling paint stands up like fur, and the big door caterwauls when you open it. We don't do much to keep it here. We only throw out scraps of wood, a broken chair, and unused tools. Yet often, after roaming all night, it shows up again in the morning, high on its haunches, proud of itself, a dead mouse set before it as a gift. A major metaphor in The Way Magellan Must Have Felt is how much the land looks like the sea. That metaphor is in no way original to me. It's been around for quite a long time. but for me it keeps giving over and over again. It keeps giving me things to write about. My family and I were just out at Long Pine camping last weekend with a family event, and I saw on the way out there about 100 groves of cottonwoods of various sizes and shapes. We had one on our land, and this is, I think there's a reason the cottonwood's a Nebraska state tree. This is about a grove of cottonwoods, but it uses that sea metaphor. Although no doubt ship masts were made of harder timber, these cottonwoods bear sails of leaves this afternoon, and here you stand, plumb amidships, on the oblong deck of this small grove in tropical heat. A good trade wind out of the south, you feel the ground go wave-like underneath your legs, certain but in a rolling pattern, a constant motion. Here is your sea, your frigate full of breath and being, borne across the globe by leaves. Every other year at Wayne High I get to teach a creative writing class. I really don't get to do as much creative writing in my job as I would probably like. But I tell my students that poetry is very much an outdoor sport, and I think you've seen a lot of my poems, almost all of them in the book, I think, are set outside. This one is a central poem in the book because it is set in the center of that cemetery that I walk through on the way to work. Another one that uses the metaphor of water. Town cemetery. Today its central lane seems a long floating dock. Old cedars and pines splashing up at the sides. Headstones bobbing like buoys. So it takes a good moment to regain your sea legs, step out and begin to walk. It's so hard to find balance when your firmest footing actually floats atop the waters of life and time. But it helps to walk here often, maintaining equilibrium, your eyes on the distance, on seagulls and ships. I think that's one of my favorite I've ever written, right there. I've got some students in the back of the room, and I have a lot of fun teaching at Wayne High School. I work my students hard, and I give them a lot of flack, and they give it right back, and that's fine with me. I've gotten better over the years of teaching about making it so papers are due on Monday. Now, lest you think that I'm making it so the kids have to work all weekend on their papers, I make it so they have to bring a rough draft to class on Friday, so all they have to do over the weekend is, if they follow what I tell them to do, and a lot of them do, they're really, really good kids, that they only have really their final editing to do over the weekend, which for me is actually one of the most enjoyable steps in the writing process. So I wrote this poem on a Sunday afternoon when I had papers coming in the next day. This puts autumn, lowercase, the season, in terms of a good student. Ever the good student, autumn has been sprawled across the carpet of our town, finishing its homework, the essay of the sky. Today, it further clarifies the thesis of sunlight with a few final details of breeze. As, pen to teeth, it simplifies the syntax of the trees. I didn't really notice this until actually it was Jeff pointed this out to me, that it shouldn't have been a surprise to me, I guess, that the classroom, students, teachers, and so on show up a lot in this book, and I honestly really did not know that until he pointed that out. This is about this is set on All Hallows, which is the real original name of Halloween, or the day after Halloween. This is called All Hallows. With the compass of our oak tree, the world has drawn a perfect circle of a harvest moon. Having finished its geometry homework, the world brushes away the excess lead with a hand of breeze. So much of the world's other classwork is flawed, a mess. But for now, in one small assignment, here it is flawless. One of the best teachers I ever had of writing, of course, Dr. Welch and other professors I had in the English department, one of the best teachers I ever had to teach me about writing was my high school math teacher. Exactitude. It had to be perfect. It had to be perfect. So, two of the final poems that I'd like to read to you from The Way Magellan Must Have Felt before I read a few newer ones are set in the snow. And this book began during that terrible winter of 2009, 2010. Remember that? We had, at Wayne High in January 2010, we had 7 snow days in the month of January that year. So I had a lot of time to write. I did a terrible job teaching because you just get started doing something and then you get 3 days off. But I did a lot of good writing that winter. And I was up early riding on one of those snow days after we had gotten some more snow, and the snow plows were out. And they were going past the house, and they were being kind of annoying. Whenever you have something that is stopping you from writing, write about that instead. Okay, so these snow plows, I started writing about them. An overnight blizzard has called all these whales up to the surface again, and since 3 a.m., they've been leaping and crashing in the new white waves of our town. Cold metal reverberates in whale song each time one breaks adrift with its blade, and a flat tail of gravel slaps the pavement as it dives again. By dawn, their dalliance will end, their nimble girth disappear, their wide wakes remain. Love it when you're writing a poem and you get that basic metaphor, and then you find that one little thing in there that even makes it more enjoyable. And for me, those spinners on the back of some of those snow plows looking like a whale tail was, or the original kind of whale tail, thank you, was really rewarding. I'm happy as a high school English teacher, but I often think about other jobs that I might have done. I think that's just the way I am. One job that I would really enjoy is being out driving those snow plows. I think that would be a lot of fun, and in particular, not in town where there's a lot of things you could hit. I would like being out in the country. Early in the morning, no light, opening up some of those country roads. I would really enjoy that job. This one's about the county snowplow driver, and this is where the book got its title. County snowplow driver. A blade divides the white waves south on Highway 15, and a yellow seaworthy vessel cuts through drifts like so much foam, its cab a sail billowed full of coffee steam and country music. Long before dawn, our explorer rounds Cape Horn and sails up the Pacific Ocean of blizzard-packed country roads. For even a local man can know the way Magellan must have felt, being farther out than anyone else yet can travel, that feeling of being first and therefore important. Call him adventuresome or half-crazy or both, these roads must be opened. Even around here, we need people willing to circumnavigate the globe and conquer the unknown, guided only by stars or by safety lights. That one was a ton of fun to write too. I'd like to read just a couple of newer poems that I hope will be in the next one. Like I said, I teach writing, and for the writing students in the rooms, like I said, if you've got something that's annoying you and stopping you from writing, write about that. And if that doesn't work, try to find the single most unpoetic thing in the room and try to write about that. Okay, the most unromantic thing in the room. One time last fall, I suffer from back problems, years grading papers. So what I often do early in the morning is sprawl out on the living room floor. My dog will let me alone, and do my writing there. And I wasn't writing very well. I was kind of tired, probably didn't sleep well. And right in front of me, literally right in front of me, was, again, one of the most unpoetic things in the world, the Baumgars flyer. And so I thought, well, I'll write about this. At least I'll get something out of it. Well, it ended up turning out rather well. Over the next few days, I finished this one up. This is called Farm Store Advertising Flyer. This is the time of year we're going into. Sweatshirts are on sale, flannels and fleeces, barn coats and coveralls, and for the first time, snow boots. a sure sign. It's late October, the clothes have all changed colors, and even your mailbox is a sky. You watch for signs of cold weather. Everything portends the big change we all know is coming, but when is so uncertain. Even this flyer is a paper goose migrating through, its wings spread wide on your table. I'm going to close with a poem about another, I guess a lot of people would consider it to be an unpoetic subject, but I consider football, like all sports, to be definitely something worth writing about, especially for a poet. And I didn't play a whole lot. I wasn't very good at any sport I played. But there was one time in a game I did something right in a football game. It was a JV game. And the coach even told me I did a good job, and it was a big moment in my life. But it was a completely broken play, and so I just happened to do something right improvising. So here I wrote a poem. It's called "Wide Receiver Broken Play." Our quarterback scrambling right, and my own passing route broken. I doubled back, found open ground, and waved my arms. Off balance, he lobbed a wobbly pass my direction, and I leapt to catch it two-handed high over my helmet. First down. I thought of that play this morning, now that my chronic back problems have subsided again. Briefly, for now, I've shaken off the cornerback of middle age and stand wide open. The wobbly pass of a pain-free day lobbed my direction. First down. I think I'll close with one set in that cemetery. I'm going to try this one out on an audience and see how it does. Again, it's set in the cemetery, and one morning it struck me that the cemetery was like a coffee shop. This is called Monday Morning. Monday morning, and the town cemetery is a kind of cafe, a small diner with a bay window where the local dead gather for coffee. As everyone else is rushing to work, their lives sealed tight as thermoses or travel mugs, here the dead linger and sip from open cups, the faint steam of what they were rising into their talk. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dwaine. All right. Readers again. Hey. All right. Dr. Don Welch retired from University of Nebraska-Kearney in May 2013 as a Reynolds Chair of Poetry, culminating 50 years in English and philosophy departments. Wow. Prior, he served in the Korean War as counterintelligence in the U.S. Army. His awards include Outstanding Professor in the Nebraska State College System, the Pratt Hines Award for Teaching Excellence, being named one of the country's outstanding poets in Design magazine, Knights of Ak-Sar-Ben Award for Teaching Excellence, Sauer Award given by the Nebraska Humanities Council, as well as his recent induction into the Nebraska English Arts Educator Hall of Fame. He has also been awarded the Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry. Dr. Welch is listed in International Writers and Authors, Cambridge, England. He is the author of 14 books of poetry, including his most recent, Morning, Last Poems from Pigeon Press, 2014. Please help me welcome Dr. Don Welch.
Well, it's good to be back in Norfolk. I think over the years I've probably given 4 or 5 readings up here. Neil, help me. Yep. and it's always a good place to come to. When I was driving up here today, I thought of my one great moment playing football for Columbus Discoverers. We were playing the Norfolk Panthers, and Norfolk had an end who was probably one of the best football players I've ever seen in my life. His name was Swagger. And so when we tried to run to the right side, Swagger would gather up the guard, the tackle, and the end in his arms and just throw them completely out of bounds, and then grab whoever had the ball. So we had a one-eyed, I'm not kidding you, we had a one-eyed fullback by the name of Hasselbeck. And I decided, as a quarterback, that we were going to trick Swagger. So for 2 straight plays, I handed the ball off to Hasselbeck, who ran into Swagger. And Swagger was always 3 yards into our backfield when Hasselbeck ran into him. But on the 3rd play, I put the ball in Hasselbeck's stomach, and as Swagger hit him, I just pulled it out and ran 85 yards for a touchdown. That was about the only moment I can remember in football in which I ever got beyond the line of scrimmage with a football. Yeah. My father is in the Nebraska High School Hall of Fame as an athlete. My wife's father is in the Nebraska High School Hall of Fame as a coach. I grew up as a jock. I always felt as a jock that if you like poetry, that something had happened to your chromosomal count at birth. You got an X chromosome, you got a Y chromosome, and you got a P chromosome. That's for poetry. And the P chromosome just obliterated the X, then it took on the Y and destroyed the Y, and so there you were, a male who was a poet. But then I realized eventually how dumb I was, how really dumb I was. So I became a poet in schools in Nebraska to tell all the students that I ran into that I was really dumb when it came to poetry. That almost anybody can write and like poetry. And so after looking at thousands of pieces of writing that students had written for me, I concluded that there was one good poem in everyone. All you have to do is write enough, and one good poem is going to come out. So I want to tell you some stories before I read 3 poems of mine. Ulysses, Nebraska, high school, another high school that's on the verge of just winking out altogether. Well, we have an elementary school there. So I walk into the 4th grade room, and in the 4th grade room there are 5 students. 4 of them have desks in the corner, and one boy sits by the door because he announces to me within the first 5 minutes that I'm there, that he has to go to the bathroom more often, all right? So we write, and then we come out and we sit in the middle of the floor on the rug and we read each other what we've written. But I can't get this little girl to come out because she's tremendously shy. And so one day she writes, I look down at what she's written and I say to her, Tammy, can I take your poem to the middle of the room and read it? And she says, yes. So with her head down in the corner, I sit down on the rug in the middle of the room with the other 4 students, and I read this. I used to be invisible. I still am, as you can see. I wish I were you and you were me. I used to be invisible. I still am, as you can see. I wish I were you and you were me. But then she had drawn next to the poem 2 great big eyes with very black pupils and long black eyelashes, but no face. Tammy Crowderville thought she was faceless. until we said to each other, man, we really like this poem. And then I saw her head come up, and the boy who had to go to the bathroom more often said, who wrote that? And I said, Tammy in the corner. Well, Tammy, he said, you can join the group. And she came out and she sat down, and that's the way we introduced Tammy Cradaville to the world of poetry. However, she'd already introduced it to herself. 5th grade. We're playing a game. I'm inside a blank. I developed this little game. I'm inside a blank. It is blank in here. It is very blank in here. I am being blank in here. So I said to the class, fill in the blanks with anything that you want. So they go ahead and they'd fill in the blanks with about 4 different blank poems. And then I'd say to them, okay, now you're on your own. You can go inside anything that you want to. Because I knew if they'd done 2 or 3 or 4, I had the rhythm in their head. And they probably couldn't get rid of the rhythm, and that would have been good because the rhythm was going to dance them out into words that they perhaps didn't really know that they had in them, or into places that they had never ever gone. And so I had looked at this boy, and I could never get him to write. And this was about Thursday of a week-long residency. And I'd said to his teacher, Bertha Dayharsh, why isn't that kid sitting right there in the front, why doesn't he ever write? I can get almost anybody to write poetry, but I can't get him to put a word on paper. And she said, oh, I should have told you about him. He doesn't write and he doesn't speak. And I said, wait a minute. What's a kid who doesn't write and doesn't speak doing in the 5th grade? And she said, well, we sometimes get inklings on the playground that he can do it, but he chooses not to. And we're hoping that one of these days he's just going to break out and he's going to say something or he's going to write something. So we did this. I'm inside a blank. You know, it is blank in here. It is very blank in here. I'm being blank in here. And I look down, and this kid is writing. When he finishes, Bertha Dayharsh blocks me into the wall, and I look at her and I say, Bertha, what is it that I've done that has necessitated you blocking me into the wall? She said, well, he wrote, and he finished. And so she called the student teacher in next door, and she said to the student teacher, you take over class. Some kids hadn't even finished. And she said, you come with me and grab me right here. That's what an older teacher can do. And so she dragged me down to the principal's office. She ran the boy's poem through the copy machine. The principal got a copy. I got a copy. Bertha had a copy. The custodian had a copy. And the school nurse had a copy. And as I looked at the poem, I could see why each of us got a copy. It looked like the writing that the Egyptians had on the Rosetta Stone. And so Bertha said, we're going to each write in our own hand what Kelly wrote, and then we're going to compare what each of us had written, and then we're going to see how close we are to what he said. And we did. And this is what we came up with. No, this is what he came up with. I am inside my head. It is a disaster. It is all falling apart. There are little green men tearing it apart. I look out my eye. I see a sign which says, do not disturb. And so I looked at the other people and I said, surely somebody knows what happened to this kid to drive him into silence. And the principal said, well, now's the time to reveal a confidence, but then you have to be confidential. In other words, it goes no further than this room. Well, I've taken it farther than that room everywhere I've gone. He said, Kelly's father came home one night drunk and threw every member of the house out of the house, including Kelly, through his bedroom plate glass window. His bedroom was on the second floor of the house. I said, that should do it. That should send any kid back into silence. So I went back in class on the last day, and I said to Bertha Dayharsh, I'm going to run a big risk. Kelly Springstead came out of silence yesterday, and I may put him back into silence, but I don't think so. So I said to the class, how many of you in the class have had days like this? The days are so crappy that you want to hang a sign up on the end of your nose saying to all the rest of the class, the school, the whole town, stay out. In other words, I want to stay in and you stay out. Well, the hands went up all over the room. I said, someone really wrote well about that yesterday. Would you like to hear the poem that he wrote? Yeah, they wanted to hear the poem. So I read, I am inside my head. It is a disaster. It is all falling apart. There are little green men tearing it apart. I look out my eyes. I see a sign which says, do not disturb. Then I look at him. He has his head down on the desk and he's on his arms. And for a moment I'm thinking to myself, well, I did it. I sent him back into more silence. But I don't know, I've had a lot of kids come up to me after writing and they say, don't read this. While handing it to me, they say, don't read this, when I know that they want me to read it. So I got down on one knee and looked up into Kelly Springstead's face, and there was the biggest doggone smile on his face that you've ever seen in your life. Later in the same period, he wrote, I used to be an old junk car, but Dr. Welch thinks I'm a Trans Am. There you go. There you go. Fourth grade, we've done the same thing. I'm inside a blank, just blank in here, the very blank in here, I'm being blank in here. Then I say to the class, you can go inside anything you want. And Patrick hauls off and goes inside something that I would have never, ever guessed a student would go inside. I am inside a poem. I am inside the P. It is noisy in here. I am inside the O. It is quiet in here. I'm inside the E. There's not a thing on in here. I'm inside the M. I feel good in here. He went inside every letter in the word poem and gave me the emotional equivalent of it. Well, that's what poetry is all about. You feel your way into something and you word your way out. And that's what Patrick did. So later in the week, we're in the lunchroom and Patrick sidles up to me and he says, Dr. Welch, you've got a secret. If I tell it to you, you can't tell anybody. And I said, Patrick, I've got a problem too. So if you tell me your secret and I don't tell anybody, you got to help me with my problem. We said, what's your problem? And I said, well, first you got to tell me what your secret is. And he looked at me with those great big fourth grade eyes and he said, I really like poetry. That's a fourth grade boy who's afraid to announce to the world that he really likes poetry because men, aren't supposed to like poetry. And so he said, okay, what's your problem? And I said, lunch. And he said, what about lunch? And I said, the cooks call this a flying saucer. You know what a flying saucer is? It's a piece of bologna on which there's a glob of potatoes, on which there's a dollop of cheese. You heat it, and the bologna is supposed to curl up like a flying saucer. Mine was just limp and oily and lay there, you know, like dead on the plate. And so Patrick says, so what do I have to do for you? And I said, you have to eat my flying saucer. And he said, no thanks. So I felt that broke our pact. And so I just gone throughout the state of Nebraska saying, you want to hear a good poem by a fourth grader who's named Patrick? I'm inside a poem. I'm inside the P. It is noisy in here. I'm inside the O. It is quiet in here. O. I'm inside the E. There's not a thing on in here. Have you ever heard a better definition of the silent E? There's not a thing on in here. I'm inside the M. I feel good in here. That's Pizza Hut good. Yeah. Sophomore class. Great big kid in the back. Towers over everybody. I'll learn later that he's 6'4", 230 pounds, and he's in with the other sophomores. You know, the sophomore in Greek means wise moron. Sophomore means wise moron. So he's in with the other wise morons who are 130, 135. And so we're writing, and he hasn't written anything that week either. And I'm telling him this. We're going to write a poem, for example, in which we're going to get into our hidden heads. Everybody's got a hidden head. And everybody in class today has a hidden head in which right now you don't know exactly what it is that you're going to pull out. So I said, you see this aisle going down to the back of the room? This aisle is like an aisle into your hidden head. You get to the back of the room and you go over that way and you go into those hilariously funny things that they tell about you when you were a kid or about someone you knew when you were a kid. But if you turn and you go over the other way, you go into all those really painful things that have happened to you or someone that you know about. What do you want to do today, I ask? Do you want to go left into funny things or right into really tragic, ugly things? It was one of those days in which they wanted to go right. So I said, okay, I want you to think about something in your head that is really, really indelibly painful and tragic. And I'm going to give you, let's say, like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 seconds to think about it. Got it? Now I said, you see the clock up there? I want you to fill up this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with the writing as fast as you can about that thing in your hidden head. I want you to fill up the whole sheet of paper in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. And they're looking at me like, you gotta be kidding. I said, no, I'm not, go. And it works, because then they start to write, and they write very fast. And because they're writing very fast, they're very unself-conscious. And because they're very unself-conscious, there are things coming out of them that are really, really painful. So after we get done, I say, someone asked William Faulkner, the great American writer, one time, where do you get these ideas for your novels? And Faulkner tapped his temple and he said, there's a lot of lumber in this attic. I said, you just brought some of the lumber out of your attic. Now this is the lumber on this 8.5 sheet of paper. You read it now, and if you find any words in there that you think are really good words, like Individual words, phrases, sentences, you circle them. Go. And they're looking at me like, what do you mean? I said, no, go. And do it fast. Read what you've written as fast or faster than you've written it, and circle what you think are the good words and the good sentences. So they do. Hopefully then we get the or out if we were minors. Now I said, take what you've circled and put it into a poem. And those are the only directions I give them. Make it look like a poem. So this kid who was in the back row and 6'4" and 230 pounds has written. And the papers have come in, and we've got about 5 minutes to go. And those of you who know those of you who know sophomores know you never turn them loose with 5 minutes to go in class. I mean, they could wreck a whole place. So I leaf through these poems as fast as I can, and I find this poem, and I said, whoa, this is really good. I said, you like to hear a really good poem? Yeah, they would. Grandpa. He was 6'3" with old age carved on his face. He usually sat in a rocker whittling a stick and humming a certain song. He was rocking one day until he rocked no more. Eyes and mouth I shut, stick and knife on the floor. One kid who was sitting right there said, would you read that again? I said, I can do that. And I knew if a boy wanted me to read the poem again, the poem had that kind of indelible mark on him, much like the indelible memory that this boy had. So we go to the teacher's lounge, and to compound the matter, 8 guys in that class have not put their names on poems. Too much sissy-like stuff to put your name on a poem. And so this kid becomes one of 9. And then we say, we did it. So I said to the teachers, late February, you've had these kids in class since August. Sleuth out the handwriting for me. Tell me who wrote this. She said, I don't think I've ever seen it before, which proved extremely prophetic because she had never seen it before. This kid had never written anything. So the next day I said to them, I've got a poem here I'm going to send to the Nebraska Arts Council in Omaha. If they have enough money to put out an anthology of student writing, I guarantee the writer that this poem will be in that anthology. But I'm not going to put down at the bottom, York 10th Anonymous. Nobody. So I got my back turned and I put papers in a briefcase, and this big voice comes from the back of the room. You know that poem? And I turned around and I said, that's yours, isn't it? And he said, yes. And I said, come on down. Write your name at the bottom of this poem. And he wrote Doug Harris, and I wrote York 10th. And he got about halfway to the door and he said, don't write York 10th, York 12th. I've been in this class 3 years, I don't do no work. Here's a kid that's been in sophomore English for 3 years, is ungrammatical, writes a poem. I wish you could see this poem. I mean, it is absolutely perfectly formed, line length and stanza breaks and everything, and that's the way it is. So, a decade later, I'm filling up with gas at the York interchange. Who walks out? Right next to me, Doug Harris. And I said, Doug, I really like that poem that you wrote about the death of your grandfather. You remember me? Nope. I said, do you remember the poem? Yeah, I said, I got it right in my billfold. Would you like to read it again? So we had him. Had 4 other brothers, all 4 in the Nebraska State Penitentiary right now. What was it Auden said? Poetry makes nothing happen. He was wrong. It may make nothing happen in terms of, let's say, civilizing a whole culture. But poetry always makes something happen with the individuals who write it. And so Doug Harris wrote a poem, and his teachers told me he went on, tried to do every assignment in English, and finally graduated from York High School. Campbell High School, another high school, now closed. We just done that going back into the past. And I was standing at the door with one of my former students, a blonde who was a really excellent English teacher, and a row of jocks in the back row of senior English passed, and the head jock looked down at her and primarily for my benefit said, "You're the dumbest broad we've ever had in the school." So I drove about 75 miles back to Kearney, and I said, I'm going to get even with this kid. In an academic way, I'm going to get even with this kid. So the next day I went back in and I said, how would you like to write a poem in which you're 20, 30, 40 years in the future? And everybody looks at me brightly, like, we're going to be out of here. And the whole back row really beams, like, now we get out of this place. I said, here's one catch. You can't. You can't get out of school. You're 20, 30, or 40 years into the future. You're a teacher who has just given an assignment to you. And now you've sat down behind your desk, and I want to know exactly what you're thinking and feeling teaching you. So you can see what I was trying to do. I was trying to turn the kid's eyeball around and let him take a look at himself the way he'd never looked at himself before. He didn't write that day either. However, I thought the assignment was good enough that about a month later I tried it in Hastings, and I got a poem that is so good that I would put it in any anthology in any state, country in the world. This is called Geometry for Beginners. This is by a senior. I teach them my geometry for beginners. Pointedly with a flat-angled wrist, I guide them through their parallel lines, their planes which do not fly, their points which are not there, and they dream in two dimensions, probably in multicolor, probably in coordinated slant rhymes about their hippopotamus. They are slow to reach the book's end. They are afraid of the exam. I know we will not pass the third dimension this year, but they don't, and they never read ahead. They'll have to let those polygon stars, those points of light, reveal to them a fourth condition, a premonition of other polygonal boxes, now contained within their own geometries. They are free, and I boxed within the star's four-pointed box, beg another coordinate for my mind, another cartoon for my soul. Have you ever heard a teacher give you a better metaphor for her or his classroom? The star's four-pointed box. I love to read this poem to teachers in April or early May, when having taught as hard and as well as they can teach, they're on their knees, but they're still moving forward. That's the tone of the poem, and this 18-year-old just nailed it, just really nailed it. Well, Kids can write well. All they have to do is be prompted well and then try to do as well as they possibly can. The three poems that I'm going to read you are poems that are very contemporary. In reading them, I have to tell you that they're from this book called In the Time of Considerable Wars, and a remarkably gifted bookmaker by the name of Alicia Mann turned out a book, this book, in hand-printed, hand-washed, a wonderful art book that cost how much per copy, Dwaine? $175 a copy. I should have brought it with you just to show you the book. However, Dwaine Spieker, in his inimitable genius and brilliance, came up with a Lulu book of the same thing for about $10. Yeah, and so there we are. So I'm going to read you the poems which end this particular book. This book consists of poems about wars that go all the way back to the Trojan War and come through the Anglo-Saxon period, and then this poem. If you've been reading anything in the papers about this so-called Islamic army called ISIL or ISIS or IS, you know of some of the atrocities that they have committed, including rape. This one, however, comes from another war which some of you younger people certainly don't remember. It comes from Bosnia-Herzegovina, in which the Muslims and the Serbs fought each other. The Serbs were largely victorious, and they raped a great many Muslim women. They also killed a great many Muslim young men, so many young men that they have become infamously known as the younger Nazis. This is the voice of a young woman who has been raped. The title of the poem is Your Victim. I am with you always. The wound in your bone, the parasite in your heart, your pussed iris. When I speak through your hand, the one still over my mouth, my cries are misshapen gourds. I am the nightmare that wants to burst your four chambers, the clot in your throat, the one you can't scream. I am the vomit that stays on your nightstand, the maggot that won't eat your sick dreams. Our granddaughter was 2 months old and was taken by her mother, who was teaching at the international school in Islamabad, Pakistan, taken back by her mother back to Islamabad. And this was before the war in Afghanistan, but there were still enough things happening in that part of the world which gave my wife and me great pause. And so one night I sat down and wrote a poetic letter to this granddaughter, 2 months old, the kind of letter that I hope she would grow up to. This is a letter to Anya, 2 months old, in Islamabad. Throughout the world, wishes shrivel on cold stones, or dry and crack like disembodied blood. Fanatics, especially those with blunt tongue tones, will never love you the way that universal well the source of love, can love you. Know then there are a few who bring this love like water up, who drink and are made whole. This is a love which will ask you to walk naked through the world with nakedness your shield, and long before you understand the heart of its great mystery, it will crucify you. If those who know nothing of its inner strength believe you weak, show them how love bends iron to its gracious will, or throws itself at storms which might unbone it. In the fury of this world, there is no stronger verb than love. It is the root which lives through drought. Anya, my small noun, may it find you out. And the last poem is called In a Time of Considerable Wars from Afghanistan. And the voice in the poem could be the voice of someone from Northeast Community College who was, let's say, volunteered or came out of college and then volunteered. And so the voice is one which is, or could be, Nebraskan, but he is someone like Dwaine Spieker, who is amazingly literate. In the time of considerable wars, Part 1, The Corporal. As he dies, his shadow lying beside him is a good dog. The sun still in love with his body, as it's always done, extending his life. In the dry light, the liquid rose on his chest is a memorial to his dead lung, while his shadow, which has never given birth to itself, which has only mimicked the words of his mouth, is a bloom, part of the still life of this long afternoon. Part 2, those in the lame man platoon. Yesterday, your other eyes looked back at you from their parallel worlds, back at you from their rivers of silence. You stood with them on the banks of your deaths. They did not blink. They were not measured by clocks. If they were fortunate enough to age like clear panes, there was about them the fragrance of space and the endlessness of good windows. But it was no mistake. These eyes were born. Their tears are like good periods in the books of the faithful. 3, overcast. No limb stirs. The trees loom space. In this gauzy absence, nothing's a lead knowing. So begins another week of wrapped up hatred, its past and future forcing our presence out the door. Down 2 steps, past 2 corpses, faceless. The air around their bodies unlived in, as before. 4, from this hole in the earth. From this hole in the earth, I am reading your letter. It is a soft hand, a good snow, a bird full of forests. Because you are who you are, and I am a soldier, I thank you for not taking my real self out of your dreams. Remember when I told you there would always be wars, that I simply hoped they weren't ours? Now, from my living grave in this earth, I hear fanatics threshing their nerves into screams. On their chests are rows and rows of black medals. I once again open your letter. I am walking the coastline of history. There is a blue wind behind me, and I am barefoot on your irreducible shore. 5. New snow. I shall look up at the sun until I find the face of it cloudless. I shall reflect upon the eruptions of its considerable anger. I am small, no more than a sound in a storm, no more intricate than my beginnings. For what was I born? From whose womb was I uttered to be a kiss among scars, a suffix of suffer? They say heat rises. I shall try to go up. I shall try to make every effort to know me. I must be considerate in a time of considerable wars.
Did anybody have any questions for Don or Dwaine? Where did Dwaine go? There he is.
This is what happens when two poets read and the evening goes on rather long, and then someone says, "Are there any questions?" And there are people sitting out there saying, "Oh, no, there can't be any questions."
Or could I go to the bathroom? Right. I would like to announce that Rogue Faculty Press and I are working on kind of a definitive selected poems of Don Welch, and we're hoping to be finishing up that project next semester and perhaps as early as late next summer, publishing that work. The idea of a collected poems, every poem that Don has in print, is not something that was even he was excited about doing. So we're doing an extended selected poems, and Don didn't mention anything tonight about his number one hobby, which is of course racing pigeons. But the title of this group of poems will be Homing. So we hope to have that out sometime in 2015.
We just hope in this book, Homing, that the bad chickens don't come home to roost. Yeah, we do. It's a bad joke, too. Shall we all rise and sing hymn 467? That's Let Us Gather at Our Automobiles. Old Protestant hymn. Right.
Both Dwaine and Don will be up here selling books and signing books if you have one that you would like them to sign, or both. And next month, October 16th, Greg Kosmicki will be reading. So hope to see you again. Thank you everybody for coming.